Hello there, and welcome to Sleep Science, where knowledge turns to dreams. We're so glad you've chosen to drift off with us. Tonight, we will explore one of Earth's most fascinating mysteries, dark oxygen. Before we begin tonight's journey, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. It's always fascinating to hear where these sleepy science stories are floating off to. Now, we humans like to think we've conquered our world. We've mapped the continents, built cities that touch the clouds, and sent probes to other planets. But here's a humbling thought. About 99% of all the livable space on Earth isn't on land at all. It's in the oceans. And most of that vast, three-dimensional realm lies in the deep sea, a place we can barely access, let alone understand. We are, in the most literal sense, strangers on our own planet. The human world is just a thin skin on the surface of a vast, living sphere we barely know. Tonight's journey takes us to a story about something that shouldn't exist. Oxygen being made in the darkest places on Earth, where sunlight gave up trying to reach billions of years ago. We'll drift down 13,000 feet below the Pacific Ocean, where scientists discovered rocks that seem to be breathing. Along the way, we'll explore what oxygen really is, why the deep sea is eternally dark, and how a discovery about potato-shaped stones might change everything we thought we knew about life itself. So get cozy, close your eyes if you like, and let's take a slow, thoughtful dive into the story of dark oxygen. 13,000 feet below the Pacific Ocean, in a place where sunlight gave up trying to reach billions of years ago, scientist Andrew Sweetman made a discovery that shouldn't exist. Picture, if you will, what it's like down there. The pressure is crushing, literally over 400 times stronger than what you feel right now. The temperature hovers just above freezing, and most remarkably of all, it's completely, utterly dark. Not dim, not shadowy, but dark in a way that's almost impossible to imagine. The kind of darkness that has never known light, never felt the warmth of a sun, never seen the dance of photons that makes life possible on the surface. Light, you see, has a peculiar relationship with water. When sunlight hits the ocean surface, it doesn't simply disappear. It goes on a gentle, gradual journey downward, losing energy with every foot it travels. The ocean acts like a vast liquid filter. First, the warm red wavelengths get absorbed, leaving the water looking blue-green. Then the yellows fade away. By about 200 feet down, most of the useful light for photosynthesis has already been swallowed up by the water itself. But light is persistent. It keeps traveling deeper, getting dimmer and bluer, until, by about 1,000 feet down, what oceanographers call the twilight zone, only the faintest whisper of blue light remains. And then, somewhere around 3,000 feet, even that last stubborn photon gives up. Below that point, for the remaining miles down to the seafloor, lies the eternal midnight of the deep ocean. This is the world Andrew Sweetman entered in 2013, not with his body, of course, but with his scientific instruments. He was there as part of a research expedition to the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, a vast underwater plain that stretches between Hawaii and Mexico. It's not a place you'd visit for the scenery. Imagine the most remote, barren desert you've ever seen. Then make it completely dark, underwater, and covered with potato-sized rocks. Sweetman's mission seemed straightforward enough. He wanted to measure how much oxygen the deep-sea creatures were consuming. It's the kind of careful, methodical work that helps scientists understand how life survives in Earth's most extreme environments. He lowered a special device called a benthic chamber lander to the seafloor, essentially a sophisticated bell jar that could capture a small section of the deep ocean and monitor what happened inside it. The expectation was simple. Oxygen levels should decrease. After all, down there in the dark, tiny creatures burrow through the sediment, bacteria break down organic matter, and various forms of life quietly go about the business of breathing. They consume oxygen just like you do, just like every animal on Earth does. There's no sunlight for photosynthesis, no plants making fresh oxygen. It should be a one-way street. Oxygen goes down, carbon dioxide goes up, and life persists on whatever oxygen can trickle down from the sunlit surface far above. But when Sweetman looked at his data, something impossible was staring back at him. The oxygen levels weren't going down. They were going up. Not by a little bit, not within the margin of error. They were increasing dramatically, consistently, mysteriously. His first instinct was entirely reasonable. The equipment must be broken. After all, you don't overturn decades of scientific understanding based on one set of readings. So he ignored the data, chalked it up to faulty sensors, and went about his business. But year after year, expedition after expedition, those strange readings kept appearing. The oxygen in his deep-sea chambers kept increasing, as if something down there in the eternal darkness was actively making it. For nearly a decade, Sweetman dismissed these results. It's what good scientists do when faced with data that seems to contradict everything they know. They check, double-check, and assume the instruments are lying before they assume the universe is stranger than expected. But eventually, the weight of evidence became impossible to ignore. The breakthrough came when Sweetman used a completely different method to measure oxygen. If one type of sensor was malfunctioning, surely a different type would show the truth. But both methods gave the same impossible answer. Something was producing oxygen in the deep sea, in total darkness, where no photosynthesis could occur. It was a moment that must have felt both thrilling and terrifying. Thrilling because discovering something genuinely new about our planet is extraordinarily rare. Terrifying because it meant rewriting textbooks, challenging assumptions, and preparing for the kind of scientific scrutiny that comes with extraordinary claims. Down there in the crushing darkness, where the only light comes from the occasional bioluminescent creature drifting by like a living star, something was quietly making oxygen, not consuming it, not recycling it, but actually creating it from scratch. In a place where photosynthesis was impossible, where plants couldn't survive, where the very concept of oxygen production seemed absurd, the ocean was somehow breathing out the gas that makes complex life possible. And the most remarkable part? This discovery was happening in a landscape covered with those potato-shaped rocks, polymetallic nodules that had been sitting on the seafloor for millions of years, patient and unremarkable. Until, quite suddenly, they became the most remarkable rocks on Earth. Every 20 seconds or so, you do something so automatic you barely notice it. You breathe in a gas that makes up just 21% of our atmosphere. But without it, every complex life form on Earth would simply stop. Oxygen is everywhere around you right now, invisible and odorless, drifting between the molecules of nitrogen and traces of other gases that make up the air. But what exactly is it? Take a moment, if you will, to imagine something you can't see. Tiny pairs of atoms, dancing together in perfect partnership. Each oxygen molecule is just two oxygen atoms holding hands, spinning and tumbling through the air at about 1,000 miles per hour, bumping into everything: the walls, your skin, the inside of your lungs. When you breathe in, you're catching millions of these molecular dancers and bringing them into your body. Inside your lungs, they dissolve into your bloodstream and take a ride to every cell in your body. Once there, they participate in one of life's most essential chemical reactions. They help break down sugar to release energy, leaving behind carbon dioxide and water as gentle byproducts. It's a process so fundamental that it's been happening in living things for billions of years, and yet it's so elegant that we barely notice it keeps us alive. But here's what makes oxygen truly extraordinary. It's not supposed to exist in large quantities on a planet's surface. Oxygen is what chemists call reactive. It loves to combine with other elements. Left to its own devices, oxygen would happily react with iron to make rust, with hydrogen to make water, with carbon to make carbon dioxide. A planet's atmosphere should gradually lose its oxygen as it gets bound up in rocks and water and other compounds. For oxygen to persist in Earth's air, something must be constantly making it, replacing what gets consumed. That something, we've always been taught, is photosynthesis. It's the gentle alchemy that happens inside every green leaf, every blade of grass, every microscopic plant drifting in the ocean. These remarkable organisms capture sunlight and use its energy to split water molecules apart, stealing the hydrogen to make sugar and releasing the oxygen as what they essentially consider waste. What's trash to a plant is treasure to us. That waste oxygen is what fills our lungs and powers our cells. The story of Earth's oxygen is one of the most dramatic transformations in our planet's history. Imagine Earth about 2.4 billion years ago. The sky was orange-pink, the air was thick with methane and carbon dioxide, and there was virtually no free oxygen anywhere. The planet looked alien because it was alien, at least to us. Then, tiny blue-green bacteria called cyanobacteria evolved the ability to harvest sunlight and split water. They spread across the ancient oceans like a gentle, microscopic revolution. These early photosynthetic organisms pumped out so much oxygen that it triggered what scientists call the Great Oxidation Event. But calling it an event makes it sound quick. It actually took millions of years. Slowly, steadily, the atmosphere filled with this reactive gas. For many of the organisms that had been thriving in the oxygen-free world, this was a catastrophe. Oxygen was toxic to them, and they retreated to the deep places where they could hide from this poisonous new air. But for the ancestors of complex life, oxygen was a gift. With this powerful gas available, organisms could extract far more energy from their food. Complex cells evolved, then multicellular organisms, then eventually the vast tapestry of life we see today. Every breath you take connects you to that ancient revolution, when simple bacteria accidentally terraformed the planet for everything that would come after. The ocean played a crucial role in this transformation. About half of all the oxygen we breathe comes not from forests or grasslands, but from tiny photosynthetic organisms floating near the ocean surface. These microscopic plants, called phytoplankton, are so small you'd need a microscope to see them, but they're so numerous that they form vast, invisible pastures, drifting through the sunlit upper layers of the sea. And here's where Andrew Sweetman's discovery becomes so startling. Photosynthesis requires light. No light, no photosynthesis. No photosynthesis, no oxygen production. It's been one of the most fundamental rules of biology. If you want to make oxygen, you need sunlight and something alive to capture it. The deep ocean, remember, is a place where sunlight never arrives. It's a realm that exists entirely on imported energy. Dead plants and animals that sink down from the surface, carrying stored sunlight in their tissues. The deep sea is essentially living off the leftovers from the sunlit world above. Down there, in the eternal darkness, every breath of oxygen has to be rationed, carefully consumed, never replenished. Except, as Sweetman discovered, that fundamental rule might be wrong. In his benthic chambers, sitting on the seafloor in complete darkness, oxygen wasn't just being conserved, it was being created. Somehow, in an environment where photosynthesis was impossible, where no plants could survive, where the very concept of oxygen production seemed absurd, the dark ocean was making the gas that powers complex life. It was as if someone had discovered a forest growing in a basement, or found fire burning underwater. The discovery challenged one of biology's most basic assumptions, that all oxygen comes from life, and all oxygen-producing life needs light. But what could possibly be making oxygen in the dark? What was down there, in that crushing, cold, lightless world, that could accomplish what only living things with access to sunlight had ever been able to do? The answer, it seemed, might lie in those potato-shaped rocks scattered across the seafloor, like some kind of geological breadcrumbs. Rocks that had been sitting quietly in the dark for millions of years, apparently doing something extraordinary that no one had ever noticed. Picture a potato-sized rock sitting quietly on the ocean floor for millions of years, and then imagine it's been breathing oxygen all along. It sounds like something from a fairy tale, doesn't it? Rocks that breathe, stones that somehow create the very gas that keeps complex life alive. But in the deepest parts of the Pacific Ocean, scattered across the seafloor like some kind of geological treasure, lie billions of these remarkable objects. Scientists call them polymetallic nodules, though magical metal potatoes might be more accurate. These aren't ordinary rocks. They're more like nature's slowest growing pearls, forming grain by grain over millions of years as metals precipitate out of seawater and settle onto small objects. Sometimes a shark's tooth, sometimes a fragment of shell, sometimes just a speck of sediment. Layer by microscopic layer, they grow, accumulating manganese, cobalt, nickel, copper, and other metals in concentric rings like the world's most patient mineral onion. The process is so slow, it almost defies imagination. These nodules grow at a rate of perhaps a few millimeters every million years. To put that in perspective, the width of a human hair represents several thousand years of growth. They've been sitting on the seafloor since long before humans existed, slowly accumulating their metallic layers while continents drifted. Ice ages came and went, and life evolved from simple cells to the complex creatures we are today. But here's where the story gets interesting. When Andrew Sweetman and his colleague Franz Geiger began investigating what might be causing the mysterious oxygen production, they had a breakthrough that came from an unexpected place, a hotel bar in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Sweetman was watching a documentary about deep-sea mining when he heard someone describe polymetallic nodules as a battery in a rock. The phrase hit him like a gentle lightning bolt. A battery, of course. What if these nodules weren't just sitting there passively? What if they were actually doing something? You see, batteries work through a beautifully simple principle. They contain two different materials that have different appetites for electrons. One material wants to give up electrons, the other wants to collect them. Connect them with a wire, and electrons flow from the giver to the taker, creating electricity. It's the same basic principle, whether you're talking about the small battery in a flashlight or the massive batteries that power electric cars. But what does this have to do with oxygen? Well, there's a process called electrolysis, the same principle that lets you split water into hydrogen and oxygen using electricity. Apply enough electrical current to water, and you can literally tear the H2O molecules apart. The hydrogen bubbles off in one direction, the oxygen in another. It's chemistry powered by electricity, and it's how we make many industrial gases. Could these nodules, Sweetman wondered, be acting like natural batteries? Their metallic composition certainly seemed promising. They contain manganese, which is used in many types of batteries. They have iron compounds that could form one terminal, and the manganese could form another. And they're sitting in the perfect electrolyte, seawater, which is full of dissolved salts that help conduct electricity. When Sweetman and Geiger tested this hypothesis, they found something extraordinary. Using a simple voltmeter, the same tool an electrician might use to check wiring, they measured the electrical potential across the surface of these nodules. Single nodules showed voltages of up to 0.95 volts. That's more than half the voltage of a typical AA battery. Now, 0.95 volts isn't quite enough to split water through electrolysis. You typically need at least 1.23 volts for that. But here's the beautiful part. These nodules don't exist in isolation. They're scattered across the seafloor in vast fields, sometimes clustered together like metallic potatoes in a mineral garden. When batteries are connected in series, their voltages add up. Two nodules touching each other could potentially produce 1.9 volts, more than enough to split water molecules. The implications are quietly astonishing. What if the seafloor isn't just a passive repository for these metal-rich nodules, but actually a vast natural battery farm? What if millions of these geological batteries have been sitting in the dark for millennia, slowly and steadily splitting seawater into hydrogen and oxygen? It would explain Sweetman's impossible data. In his benthic chambers, sitting above fields of these nodules, the chambers were capturing the oxygen being produced by a form of chemistry that had never been observed in nature before. Electrolysis powered by geological batteries, happening without any input from life or sunlight. The process would be gentle, almost imperceptible. Each nodule cluster might produce only tiny amounts of electricity, generating just a whisper of oxygen, but spread across thousands of square miles of seafloor, with millions of these nodules working like a vast, distributed power grid. The effect could be substantial enough to create measurable increases in oxygen concentration. It's a process that exists at the intersection of geology, chemistry, and physics. The nodules form through purely geological processes, accumulating metals over millions of years. The metallic composition creates electrical potential differences across their surfaces. The seawater provides the perfect conductive medium, and when conditions are just right, chemistry takes over, splitting water molecules and releasing oxygen into the deep sea. What makes this discovery so remarkable isn't just that it challenges our understanding of where oxygen can come from. It's that it suggests the boundary between living and non-living processes might be more blurred than we ever imagined. Here's a purely geological, non-biological process that's accomplishing something we thought only life could do. creating oxygen from water. Of course, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the scientific community isn't quite ready to rewrite textbooks based on one team's findings. Other researchers have attempted to replicate Sweetman's results with mixed success. Some have found similar oxygen increases, others haven't. The debate continues, as it should in science, with researchers carefully testing and retesting to separate genuine discoveries from experimental artifacts. But the possibility remains tantalizing. If rocks can make oxygen, if the dark seafloor can breathe, then our understanding of life, chemistry, and even the search for life on other worlds might need some gentle revision. After all, if potato-shaped rocks on Earth can produce oxygen in eternal darkness, what might be possible in the hidden oceans of distant moons, or in the depths of alien seas we've never imagined? The story of dark oxygen is still being written, one careful experiment at a time. But already, it's changing how we think about the blue planet we call home, reminding us that even after centuries of exploration, the deep oceans still hold secrets that can surprise us, challenge us, and fill us with wonder. Nothing stirs up the scientific world quite like a discovery that changes everything we thought we knew, especially when there are billions of dollars worth of metals sitting on the seafloor. Imagine you're Andrew Sweetman. You've just published research suggesting that rocks can breathe oxygen. Extraordinary research, the kind that could rewrite textbooks and change how we understand life itself. Now imagine that some of your research was funded by a company whose entire business model depends on mining those very same rocks from the ocean floor. Welcome to the messy, human side of science. The metals company didn't take kindly to Sweetman's findings. Not at all. Here was a mining corporation that had spent millions of dollars and over a decade preparing to harvest polymetallic nodules from the deep sea. They'd conducted environmental studies, developed specialized equipment, negotiated with international bodies. Their plan was straightforward: vacuum up millions of these potato-shaped rocks and extract the precious metals inside: cobalt, nickel, manganese, copper, all the materials needed for electric car batteries, wind turbines, solar panels, the green energy revolution powered by the deep sea. But Sweetman's research suggested these weren't just inert rocks. They might be oxygen factories, living geological systems in a sense, that had been quietly sustaining deep-sea ecosystems for millions of years. If that were true, mining them wouldn't just be extracting metals, it would be destroying the lungs of the deep ocean. The company's response was swift and pointed. They published a formal rebuttal claiming Sweetman's methodology was flawed, his data incomplete, his conclusions misleading. They pointed out inconsistencies, questioned his equipment calibration, and suggested alternative explanations for his oxygen readings. In short, they did what any company would do when facing research that threatens their business model. They fought back. But here's where the story gets more complicated. Science thrives on this kind of controversy. Healthy skepticism. It's how we separate genuine discoveries from experimental errors, how we distinguish between breakthrough findings and wishful thinking. When someone claims to have overturned decades of established science, the response should be scrutiny, not applause. Other researchers began attempting to replicate Sweetman's work. Some found similar results, others didn't. The European Mining Impact 2 project, which had conducted dozens of similar chamber experiments in nodule fields, reported no signs of oxygen production. Their data showed what everyone expected. Oxygen consumption, not production. Why the difference? Nobody knows for sure. Maybe it depends on the specific type of nodules, their age, their clustering patterns. Perhaps it requires particular oceanographic conditions, specific temperatures, pressures, or chemical compositions in the seawater. Maybe some regions of the sea floor produce dark oxygen, while others don't. Or maybe, as the critics suggest, the whole phenomenon is an artifact of measurement errors. This is how science works, though it's not always comfortable to watch. Researchers poke holes in each other's work. They demand better evidence, clearer methodology, more convincing data. Sometimes this process reveals genuine discoveries. Sometimes it exposes flawed experiments. Often, it simply demonstrates how much we still don't know. Bo Barker Joransson, an independent researcher at Aarhus University, conducted his own experiments and found no evidence of oxygen production. He criticized Sweetman's methods, pointing out that the deep-sea pressures weren't properly replicated in lab experiments. The voltage measurements from individual nodules were inconsistent and often far below what's needed for electrolysis. The hydrogen gas that should be produced alongside oxygen wasn't measured accurately. Valid criticisms, important questions. This is peer review in action. But Sweetman's team had responses too. They argued that their field measurements were consistent across multiple expeditions and different instruments. The pressure criticism was irrelevant to the core finding, they claimed, and the clustering effect could explain how individual nodules with modest voltages could combine to produce sufficient electrical current for water splitting. Back and forth the debate went, papers and rebuttals, conference presentations and heated discussions, data analysis and reanalysis. It's the scientific method doing what it does best, grinding slowly toward truth through the collision of competing ideas. Meanwhile, the stakes kept rising. The International Seabed Authority was considering permits for commercial deep-sea mining. Environmental groups rallied around Sweetman's research as evidence that we don't understand these ecosystems well enough to start destroying them. Mining companies pushed back, arguing that the research was inconclusive and shouldn't delay projects that could provide materials for renewable energy. Politics entered the picture, as it often does when science intersects with economics. Some countries supported a moratorium on deep-sea mining until more research could be conducted. Others, eager for the metals these nodules contain, argued that we couldn't wait decades for perfect knowledge before acting. It's a familiar tension in environmental science. How much evidence do we need before making decisions? How certain must we be before acting? How do we balance immediate economic needs against potential ecological risks? Nature Geoscience, the prestigious journal that published Sweetman's original paper, found itself reviewing not just rebuttals, but rebuttals to rebuttals. The scientific community watched with interest as one of the most fundamental assumptions in biology, that only living things can produce oxygen, faced its most serious challenge in centuries. And through it all, those potato-shaped rocks continued sitting quietly on the seafloor, patient, mysterious, possibly breathing oxygen, possibly not. They didn't care about the controversy they'd inspired, the careers they had affected, the industries they disrupted. They just sat there, as they had for millions of years, holding their secrets in the dark. The controversy isn't settled yet. It may not be for years. Science moves slowly, deliberately. testing and retesting until the evidence becomes overwhelming. But that's okay. That's how it should be. Extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence, and the process of gathering that evidence teaches us as much as the final answer. What's clear is that Sweetman's research, whether ultimately right or wrong, has accomplished something valuable. It's reminded us how much mystery still lies beneath the waves, how many assumptions we've made about our planet without really testing them, how much wonder remains in the deep places we've barely begun to explore. The ocean isn't just one big bathtub of water. It's more like a layered cake, with each layer holding different secrets, different creatures, and different rules about how life can exist. If you could somehow drain all the water from the Pacific Ocean and walk across its floor, you'd find yourself in the most alien landscape on Earth. Vast plains, towering mountain ranges that dwarf the Himalayas, trenches so deep they could swallow Mount Everest and still have room for another mountain on top. And scattered across this hidden terrain, like stars across a dark sky, billions of those mysterious polymetallic nodules. But when the ocean is full, as it has been for hundreds of millions of years, this underwater world operates according to its own physics. Water behaves differently than air. It's denser, more viscous, better at conducting heat and electricity. It stratifies into layers based on temperature and salinity, creating invisible boundaries that can be as real as walls. Near the surface, where Andrew Sweetman's dark oxygen story begins and ends, lies the sunlit zone, the photic zone, scientists call it. Here, in the top 200 meters or so, photosynthesis happens. Tiny plants drift and multiply, converting sunlight into food and releasing oxygen as a happy accident. This is where most marine life congregates, where the action is, where the energy enters the oceanic food web. The water here is warm, relatively speaking, rich in dissolved oxygen, full of nutrients being mixed by waves and currents. It's the ocean's equivalent of a bustling city, crowded, productive, constantly changing. Fish dart through schools of smaller fish. Jellyfish pulse through the blue. Whales surface to breathe the air that those tiny plants help maintain. But step off this sunlit continental shelf, and you enter a different world entirely. Below the photic zone lies the twilight zone, or mesopelagic, where the last traces of sunlight fade into blue memory. Here, between about 200 and 1,000 meters down, lives one of the largest animal migrations on Earth. Every night, billions of creatures rise from the depths to feed in the rich surface waters. Every dawn, they sink back down, carrying nutrients and energy into the dark. These creatures have evolved remarkable adaptations: bioluminescence, the ability to make their own light through chemical reactions. It's like carrying a firefly in your cells, using chemistry to create the illumination that the sun can no longer provide. Down here, 90% of animals can make their own light. Not for photosynthesis, that party's over, but for communication, hunting, defense. Deeper still lies the bathypelagic zone, the true deep sea. This is where Sweetman's instruments descended, where his chambers settled onto the sea floor, where the impossible oxygen readings began appearing. Here, pressure reaches levels that would instantly crush any surface dweller. The water temperature hovers just above freezing year-round, and the darkness is complete, total, eternal. This is an ecosystem built entirely on leftovers. Marine snow, scientists call it. a gentle, constant rain of organic matter drifting down from the surface. Dead plankton, fish scales, fecal pellets, the detritus of life falling like soft snow through the water column, sometimes taking weeks to reach the bottom. By the time this organic matter reaches the deep sea floor, most of the good stuff has been consumed. What arrives is the ecological equivalent of sawdust, low energy, difficult to digest, but better than nothing. Deep sea creatures have evolved to survive on this meager diet, becoming living embodiments of efficiency and patience. The water itself tells a story of time and distance. Deep ocean water can be hundreds or even thousands of years old. It may have last seen sunlight when Shakespeare was writing plays, when the American Revolution was brewing, when your great-great-grandmother was learning to walk. This ancient water carries chemical signatures from its long journey, traces of nutrients, dissolved gases, the molecular memory of its travels. Ocean currents move this water in vast, slow loops that connect every sea on Earth. The global conveyor belt, oceanographers call it. Cold, dense water sinks near the poles and creeps across the deep ocean floor, gradually rising and warming in tropical regions. It's a circulation system that transports heat, nutrients, and yes, oxygen across the planet. But here's where Sweetman's discovery becomes even more intriguing. The deep ocean is naturally low in oxygen, not because there's no life, there's plenty of life, but because there's no way to make more. Every molecule of oxygen down there started as photosynthesis somewhere else, sometime else. It dissolved into surface water and slowly, patiently, made its way into the depths. Oxygen consumption in the deep sea follows predictable patterns. Microbes break down organic matter, using oxygen in the process. Animals breathe, extracting oxygen from the water as it passes over their gills or through their tissues. Chemical reactions between seawater and rock consume more oxygen over geological timescales. It's a one-way street. Oxygen goes in, carbon dioxide comes out. That's why Sweetman's readings were so shocking. In this oxygen-starved environment, where every molecule of this precious gas is carefully rationed and gradually depleted, his instruments were recording increases, substantial increases, impossible increases. The Clarion-Clipperton zone where this happened has its own peculiarities. It's a relatively flat region of seafloor, about the size of Europe, carpeted with those metallic nodules. The water here is particularly old and nutrient-poor. Life exists, but sparsely. It's one of the most stable, unchanging environments on Earth, or so we thought. Recent studies suggest this region hosts between 5,000 and 8,000 species, most of them unknown to science. Tiny worms that live in the sediment, strange fish with antifreeze proteins in their blood, sea cucumbers that look like animated vacuum cleaners, and scattered among them, those nodules, sitting like metallic eggs in a vast underwater nest. If Sweetman is right, these nodules aren't just geological curiosities. They're active participants in the ecosystem, oxygen factories that have been quietly supporting life in the deep sea for millions of years. They're not just part of the scenery. They are the scenery, and they're breathing. The implications ripple outward like waves from a dropped stone. If the deep sea floor can produce oxygen, then our models of ocean chemistry need revision. Our understanding of how nutrients cycle through marine ecosystems requires updating. Our assumptions about what drives biological productivity in the deep sea might be fundamentally wrong. It also means that the deep ocean is even more interconnected than we realized. Those ancient water masses don't just carry heat and nutrients. They might carry dark oxygen too, produced by geological processes we're only beginning to understand. The slow circulation of the deep sea might be distributing this non-biological oxygen across the planet, supporting life in ways we never imagined. And if that's true, then those seemingly barren nodule fields aren't barren at all. They're more like underwater gardens, quietly productive, subtly alive, breathing oxygen into the dark water that surrounds them. Chemistry doesn't care if there's sunlight or not. Molecules will react, combine, and transform, whether they're in a sunny garden or the deepest trench on Earth. This is perhaps the most beautiful aspect of Andrew Sweetman's discovery. Chemistry is democratic. It doesn't require permission from biology, doesn't need life's approval to get started. Give it the right ingredients, the right conditions, and chemistry will cheerfully proceed to rearrange atoms and create new compounds, regardless of whether anyone is watching. For most of human history, we've thought of chemistry as something that happens in laboratories, test tubes and Bunsen burners, careful measurements and controlled conditions. But chemistry was doing its thing long before humans existed, long before life itself took hold on this planet. The universe has been practicing chemistry for over 13 billion years, and it's gotten rather good at it. Consider what happens when you drop an iron nail into seawater. Slowly, patiently, the iron begins to rust. Oxygen atoms bond with iron atoms, forming iron oxide. It's a chemical reaction that requires no input from life, no energy from the sun. Just iron, oxygen, and water, following the fundamental rules of chemistry that govern how atoms like to arrange themselves. Now imagine that same process happening on a vast scale, over millions of years, in the crushing darkness of the deep sea. Iron-rich polymetallic nodules sitting in oxygen-rich seawater, slowly developing layers of different minerals as metals precipitate out of solution and settle onto their surfaces. It's chemistry as geology, patient and inexorable. But Sweetman's hypothesis suggests something more dramatic is happening. Not just passive rusting, but active electrochemistry. The nodules aren't just sitting there gathering dust. They're generating electricity and using it to split water molecules. To understand how this might work, let's take a gentle wander through the principles of electrochemistry. It starts with the fact that different metals have different relationships with electrons. Some metals, like zinc, are generous with their electrons. They give them up easily. Others, like copper, are more possessive. They prefer to hang on to their electrons, or even steal electrons from other atoms. Put these two types of metals in contact with each other. Add an electrolyte, a substance that helps conduct electricity like salt water, and you've created a battery. Electrons flow from the generous metal to the possessive one, creating an electrical current. It's the same principle whether you're talking about the battery in your phone or a massive car battery. The polymetallic nodules contain this exact setup. Manganese-rich layers alternate with iron-rich layers. Different minerals with different electrical properties, all intimately mixed and layered over millions of years of slow growth. When seawater, nature's perfect electrolyte, surrounds these nodules, it creates the conditions for electrical current to flow. Franz Geiger's laboratory experiments confirm this. Individual nodules generated measurable voltages, sometimes approaching 1 volt. That's impressive for a rock. More importantly, when multiple nodules were clustered together, their electrical potentials could add up, potentially reaching the 1.23 volts needed for electrolysis. Electrolysis itself is elegantly simple. Apply sufficient electrical current to water, and the H2O molecules literally fall apart. The electrical energy breaks the bonds holding hydrogen and oxygen atoms together. Hydrogen gas bubbles off at one electrode, oxygen gas at the other. It's like chemistry in reverse. Instead of burning hydrogen and oxygen to make water and energy, you're using energy to split water back into hydrogen and oxygen. This process happens in industrial facilities around the world. Hydrogen production plants use electrolysis to split water and harvest the hydrogen for various uses. The oxygen is often considered a byproduct, sometimes vented to the atmosphere, sometimes captured for medical or industrial applications. But imagine this same process happening naturally, powered not by electrical grids, but by geological batteries, occurring not in sterile industrial facilities, but on the sea floor, among the most remote and pristine ecosystems on Earth. The chemistry would be gentle, almost imperceptible. Each nodule cluster might split only a few water molecules per day, but spread across thousands of square kilometers of seafloor, with millions of these natural batteries working simultaneously, the cumulative effect could be substantial. The hydrogen produced would quickly dissolve into the seawater or react with other compounds. Hydrogen is a small reactive molecule. It doesn't stick around long in natural environments. But the oxygen would be more stable, more likely to accumulate in the water column, more likely to be detected by sensitive instruments like Sweetman's benthic chambers. What makes this chemistry particularly intriguing is that it's completely independent of biology. No organisms required, no sunlight needed, just rocks, water, and the fundamental forces that govern how atoms interact with each other. It's chemistry at its most basic level, following rules that apply throughout the universe. This has profound implications for our understanding of planetary chemistry. Earth isn't the only world with oceans and metallic minerals. Mars likely had oceans in its ancient past and may still have subsurface water. Europa and Enceladus, moons of Jupiter and Saturn, have vast oceans beneath their icy shells. If dark oxygen production is possible on Earth, it might be possible on these worlds too. The chemistry would work the same way. Different worlds might have different metals, different ocean compositions, different temperatures and pressures, but the fundamental principles of electrochemistry are universal. Put metals with different electrical properties in contact with an electrolyte, and electrons will flow. Provide enough electrical potential, and water molecules will split. This universality is what makes Sweetman's discovery so exciting for astrobiologists. We've always assumed that finding life elsewhere would require finding evidence of biological processes. But if non-biological chemistry can produce oxygen, one of the most important signatures of life, then our search strategies might need revision. It also suggests that the boundary between chemistry and biology might be less distinct than we thought. Life, after all, is chemistry with intentions. Living organisms use the same chemical reactions that happen in non-living systems. But they organize and control these reactions in sophisticated ways. Maybe the deep-sea nodules represent something in between, not alive, but not entirely passive either. geological systems that participate actively in their environment, influencing the chemistry of the surrounding water, creating conditions that support life even though they themselves aren't living. It's a humbling reminder that chemistry doesn't need our permission to be remarkable. Whether in the bright laboratories of universities or the dark depths of the ocean, molecules will continue their ancient dance, following rules we're still learning to understand, creating possibilities we're only beginning to imagine. The story of dark oxygen is, ultimately, a story about chemistry's quiet persistence, its ability to surprise us, challenge our assumptions, and reveal new ways that the universe organizes itself. And sometimes, just sometimes, it breathes oxygen into the dark places where we least expect to find it. If rocks can make oxygen in Earth's deepest, darkest places, what might be possible under the ice of Europa or in the hidden seas of worlds we've never visited? This question keeps NASA scientists awake at night, though probably in a good way. The discovery of dark oxygen doesn't just change how we understand our own planet. It transforms our approach to finding life elsewhere in the universe. For decades, we've been looking for water, organic molecules, and energy sources. Signs of photosynthesis, biosignatures in atmospheric compositions. But we've always assumed that oxygen production requires biology, and biology requires quite specific conditions. Sweetman's research suggests we might have been thinking too narrowly. Consider Europa, Jupiter's ice-covered moon. Beneath its frozen shell lies an ocean that contains more water than all of Earth's oceans combined. It's dark down there, completely dark. No sunlight has touched those waters in billions of years. By our old understanding, such a place could never produce oxygen, could never support the kind of complex life that depends on oxygen-powered metabolism. But if polymetallic nodules can generate oxygen through electrochemistry, what about the rocky seafloor beneath Europa's hidden ocean? Jupiter's powerful magnetic field bathes Europa in radiation, potentially creating electrical currents in the moon's metallic core. The same tidal forces that keep Europa's ocean liquid also drive geological activity, potentially creating the kind of metal-rich minerals we find in Earth's nodule fields. The chemistry would work the same way it does on Earth. Different metals in contact with salt water, electrical potentials building up over geological time, water molecules splitting into hydrogen and oxygen. The fundamental laws of electrochemistry don't change just because you're orbiting Jupiter instead of warming yourself by our sun. Enceladus, Saturn's tiny, icy moon, presents an even more intriguing possibility. The Cassini spacecraft detected water vapor plumes erupting from its south pole, actual ocean water escaping into space through cracks in the ice. Chemical analysis of these plumes revealed hydrogen gas, suggesting active chemistry happening in the hidden ocean below. But where there's hydrogen production, oxygen production might follow. If Enceladus has metallic minerals on its ocean floor, and there's no reason it shouldn't, then it might be generating oxygen through the same electrochemical processes Sweetman discovered on Earth. That oxygen could support complex ecosystems we never imagined possible in such remote, sunless environments. The implications ripple outward to exoplanets, those distant worlds orbiting other stars. We've discovered thousands of them, and many appear to have the right conditions for liquid water. But most orbit red dwarf stars, much dimmer than our Sun. Even if these planets have oceans, sunlight might penetrate only a few meters below the surface, making photosynthesis difficult or impossible. Traditional astrobiology would write off such worlds as unlikely to support complex life. But if dark oxygen production is a universal possibility, if any world with oceans and metallic minerals can generate oxygen through electrochemistry, then the habitable zone around stars becomes much larger, much more forgiving. We're talking about a fundamental shift in how we think about habitability. The Goldilocks zone, that narrow band around a star where temperatures are just right for liquid water, has always been our guide for finding potentially habitable worlds. But if life doesn't need photosynthesis to access oxygen, then planets much farther from their stars become interesting. Frozen worlds with subsurface oceans, rogue planets drifting through interstellar space, moons of gas giants in the outer reaches of solar systems. The universe suddenly becomes a much more lively place. But let's drift back to Earth for a moment. The discovery of dark oxygen also changes how we understand our planet's early history. Before the Great Oxidation Event, before cyanobacteria began pumping oxygen into the atmosphere, Earth's oceans might have been generating small amounts of oxygen through electrochemical processes. Not enough to dramatically change the atmosphere, but perhaps enough to support the first oxygen-tolerant organisms. Maybe life didn't have to wait for photosynthesis to access oxygen. Maybe geological oxygen production provided a stepping stone, a gentle introduction to this reactive gas that would eventually transform our planet. It's an intriguing possibility that Earth's rocky seafloor was quietly preparing the stage for the oxygen revolution that would follow. This connects to one of astrobiology's most fundamental questions. How do we recognize life when we see it? Oxygen has always been considered a strong biosignature, a sign that biological processes are actively maintaining atmospheric composition against chemical equilibrium. But if oxygen can be produced geologically, then detecting it in an exoplanet's atmosphere becomes more ambiguous. That's not necessarily bad news. It just means we need to be more sophisticated in our analysis. Context matters. How much oxygen? What other gases are present? What's the planet's geology like? The discovery of dark oxygen doesn't eliminate oxygen as a biosignature. It just adds nuance to how we interpret it. NASA's James Webb Space Telescope, now scanning the atmospheres of distant worlds, will need to consider these possibilities. When it detects oxygen on an exoplanet, scientists will have to ask, is this biological oxygen from photosynthesis or geological oxygen from electrochemical processes? Or perhaps, most intriguingly, both. The search for extraterrestrial life has always been a search for the familiar. Water like our water. Carbon-based chemistry like our chemistry. Energy sources like the ones life uses on Earth. But Sweetman's discovery reminds us that the universe might be more creative than our imaginations, more resourceful, more willing to find ways for chemistry to support complexity, even in the darkest, most remote corners of space. It also suggests that the boundary between living and non-living processes might be more fluid than we thought. On Earth, the transition from non-biological chemistry to biological chemistry happened gradually, over hundreds of millions of years. Maybe that transition is still happening, in deep ocean trenches and hydrothermal vents, and nodule fields we haven't even discovered yet. The universe is vast, ancient, and patient. It's had nearly 14 billion years to experiment with chemistry. to find new ways for atoms to organize themselves, to discover pathways from simple molecules to complex systems. If electrochemical oxygen production is possible on Earth, it's probably happening on countless other worlds too. Worlds we haven't found yet, worlds we can't even imagine yet. And that's perhaps the most beautiful aspect of Sweetman's discovery. It doesn't just change what we know about our planet. It expands what we think is possible throughout the cosmos. It suggests that life, or something like life, might be more resilient, more resourceful, more widespread than we ever dared to hope. In the dark depths of alien oceans, under the ice of distant moons, on the rocky seafloors of worlds orbiting dim red stars, chemistry might be quietly breathing oxygen into the darkness, preparing the way for whatever comes next. Patient as stone, persistent as water, surprising as the first breath of dawn. Every great discovery asks us to rewrite the story we tell ourselves about how gases, rocks, water, and life all dance together in ways we never imagined. So where does this leave us? Floating in the space between what we thought we knew and what we're just beginning to understand. It's an uncomfortable place, scientifically speaking, but also an exciting one. The best discoveries don't just answer questions. They reveal how many questions we didn't even know we should be asking. In January 2025, the Nippon Foundation announced a $2 million research grant to help answer some of these questions. Andrew Sweetman and his team will spend the next 3 years conducting the most comprehensive study of dark oxygen production ever attempted. They're building custom sensors that can descend to depths of 11,000 meters, deeper than any previous oxygen measurement devices. They're planning multiple expeditions to different regions of the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. Most importantly, they're going to measure hydrogen production alongside oxygen production. That last bit is crucial. If electrolysis is really happening, if water molecules are being split by geological batteries, then hydrogen gas should be produced in predictable ratios to oxygen. Find the hydrogen, and you've got much stronger evidence for the electrochemical hypothesis. Miss the hydrogen, and you might need to look for other explanations. The research will also investigate whether microorganisms play any role in dark oxygen production. Maybe it's not purely geological after all. Perhaps certain bacteria have learned to facilitate or enhance the electrochemical processes happening on nodule surfaces. Life and geology working together in ways we haven't recognized. It wouldn't be the first time biology and chemistry conspired to surprise us. But even if the current research confirms dark oxygen production, even if the mechanism becomes clear, the implications will take decades to fully understand. Textbooks will need revision. Ocean chemistry models will require updating. Our understanding of early Earth history might shift in subtle but important ways. Consider what this means for marine biology. If deep-sea ecosystems have access to locally produced oxygen, they might be more productive than we thought. Those sparse, energy-starved communities living on marine snow might actually be supplemented by a constant, gentle supply of fresh oxygen from the seafloor itself. The deep ocean might be less of a desert and more of a carefully balanced ecosystem with its own internal sources of one of life's most essential gases. This has immediate implications for deep-sea mining regulations. The International Seabed Authority is still debating whether to allow commercial extraction of polymetallic nodules. If those nodules are actively supporting marine ecosystems through oxygen production, then mining them isn't just removing rocks. It's potentially dismantling life support systems that took millions of years to develop. Think about it this way. Imagine discovering that certain trees in a forest were producing not just oxygen through photosynthesis, but also generating electricity that powered nearby ecosystems in ways no one had previously understood. Then imagine someone wanting to cut down those trees to harvest the metals in their trunks. The environmental impact assessment would need to consider not just the loss of the trees themselves, but the collapse of the entire electrical ecosystem they'd been supporting. That's essentially the situation we face with deep-sea mining and dark oxygen production. We're only beginning to understand how these systems work, but we're already making decisions about whether to disrupt them. It's a classic case of trying to manage what we don't yet comprehend. The research coming over the next few years will be crucial, not just for resolving the scientific debate, but for informing policy decisions that could affect millions of square kilometers of seafloor, some of the most pristine, least understood ecosystems on Earth. Beyond the immediate practical implications, dark oxygen research is changing how we think about our planet's fundamental processes. For over a century, we've built our understanding of Earth's oxygen cycle on the assumption that biology is the only significant source of this gas. Photosynthesis in the oceans and on land. That's it. Simple, elegant, easily quantified. But if geological processes can also produce meaningful amounts of oxygen, our models become more complex, more interesting. We'll need to account for electrochemical production in our calculations of global oxygen budgets. We'll need to understand how geological oxygen production varies across different ocean basins, different rock types, different chemical conditions. It's the kind of discovery that makes scientists simultaneously excited and exhausted. Excited because it opens new avenues of research, new possibilities for understanding. Exhausted because it means decades of careful work to integrate this new knowledge into our existing frameworks. The educational implications are equally significant. Students learning about Earth's oxygen cycle will need to understand that it's not just a biological process, that chemistry and geology play active roles too, that the boundary between living and non-living systems is more permeable than previous generations were taught. Perhaps most profoundly, dark oxygen research is teaching us humility. After centuries of ocean exploration, after decades of detailed study of marine ecosystems, we're still discovering fundamental processes we never knew existed. The ocean still holds secrets. Our planet can still surprise us. This should make us more cautious about making sweeping statements about what's possible elsewhere in the universe. If we're still learning basic facts about oxygen production on Earth, how can we confidently predict what might happen on Europa or Enceladus, or any of the thousands of exoplanets we're discovering? The story of dark oxygen is ultimately a story about the limits of knowledge, about the importance of staying open to possibilities we haven't considered, about maintaining wonder in the face of apparent certainty. As Sweetman's team prepares for their next expedition into the deep, as their custom sensors undergo final testing, as research vessels prepare to return to that remote patch of Pacific seafloor, we're reminded that science is an ongoing conversation between curiosity and discovery, between what we think we know and what we're willing to learn. The deep ocean is patient. It's been keeping its secrets for billions of years. It can wait a little longer while we figure out the right questions to ask, develop the right tools to probe its mysteries, learn to listen more carefully to what it's been trying to tell us all along. Maybe those potato-shaped rocks really are breathing oxygen into the dark. Maybe they're not. Either way, the process of finding out is teaching us something valuable about our planet, our assumptions, and ourselves. And in the end, that might be the most important discovery of all. And so, we arrive at the end of our gentle dive into the mystery of dark oxygen. Though in truth, the mystery is just beginning to unfold. We started 13,000 feet above the seafloor. In the comfortable ignorance of thinking, we understood how oxygen works on our planet. We've drifted down through layers of ocean and knowledge alike, discovering that the dark depths hold possibilities we never imagined. Rocks that might breathe, chemistry that doesn't need biology's permission. Along the way, we've wandered through the fundamentals of light and water, gases and chemistry, the patient accumulation of metals over geological time. We've seen how science works, through controversy and wonder, the slow grinding of evidence against assumption until truth begins to emerge. Perhaps most beautifully, we've been reminded that our blue planet still has secrets to share. Even in our age of satellites and sensors, the deep ocean can still surprise us, still challenge everything we thought we knew, still fill us with a wonder at the elegant possibilities hidden in the dark. The potato-shaped rocks continue their patient work, whether breathing oxygen or simply being quietly extraordinary. Andrew Sweetman and his team continue preparing instruments for their next descent. And the deep ocean continues its ancient circulation, carrying mysteries we're only beginning to understand. So drift peacefully, knowing that while you sleep, chemistry continues its patient dance in the darkest places. And somewhere in those depths, new discoveries wait for curious minds who remember to be surprised by the world they're lucky enough to call home. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleep Science.